Williamsburg in Brooklyn has become one of the most expensive neighborhoods in all of Brooklyn, probably over the past 10-ish years, and for good reason. Not only does Williamsburg have some of the nicest apartments I've probably ever seen in my entire life, but it's also a waterfront neighborhood with amazing views of Manhattan, like absolutely incredible. Some of the best views you'll ever see of the Manhattan skyline in your life. So what makes this neighborhood so unique? In this neighborhood, you get a true city vibe, but at the same time, you also kind of get that waterfront living feel as well, depending on where you live in the neighborhood. I always say there is nothing like being in a waterfront neighborhood because you can either be in a waterfront neighborhood or a landlocked neighborhood in New York City. Now, the differences are pretty clear between the two. One of them, you can easily walk to the waterfront and get incredible views, while the other one, you're just going to be in more of a city urban environment at all times unless you walk to one of those waterfront neighborhoods. I've lived in both waterfront neighborhoods and landlocked neighborhoods, and I do have to say I always enjoy the waterfront more. But that is also a personal preference. Some people don't care about that as much. Williamsburg apartments are absolutely incredible. You can find all different types of real estate here. But because this is such a desirable neighborhood, these apartments come at a price. They are very expensive. And if your apartment has a view of the Manhattan skyline, it's going to be even pricier because of that. People pay all sorts of money for those type of views. Because if you think about it, there's only a certain amount of apartments that have those views of the Manhattan skyline. Over the past 10-ish years, Williamsburg has really blown up as a neighborhood, and it's become the trendy neighborhood that it is today. During that time period, there's been so much construction that has been taking place in the neighborhood. And because of that, there's a lot of new construction homes there. So you can find either new builds there, or you can find buildings that were converted into newer construction homes that are brand new apartments. That means that these buildings have never been apartments before, so you're living in a brand new unit. You can definitely find your fair share of this type of real estate here in this neighborhood. With a waterfront neighborhood, you also get waterfront dining. And who doesn't love waterfront dining? Now, there are only certain neighborhoods in all of New York City that are waterfront neighborhoods. So because of that, you can only imagine that there really isn't that many waterfront restaurants in all of New York City as a whole. They're kind of rare and hard to come by. And I'm sure it's also because the leases for these restaurants are probably extremely high because everybody wants to be on the waterfront and people are going to pay a price for that. Sometimes when I'm in the mood to go out and dine somewhere on a really nice day, I prefer to be on the waterfront by all means. And I will literally go out of my way to go to a waterfront neighborhood and waterfront dine because in New York City, you're just in an urban environment all the time that it's so nice to be able to get away from that and be able to just go out on the waterfront and enjoy the view. And not only do you have that, but also in some of these restaurants, you're also getting a view of Manhattan. So you have the skyline plus the waterfront. You don't get a view of the Manhattan skyline when you're in Manhattan, that's for sure. Because Williamsburg is a waterfront neighborhood, they also have a ferry that you can get to Manhattan from. Not all neighborhoods that are waterfront in New York City have ferries. That is definitely for sure. Most neighborhoods do not have ferries, but this one does. And they have a few ferry stops. And you can also get to other areas of Brooklyn. You can get to Manhattan. Very convenient to have these options here. And also, sometimes it's just nice to not have to take the subway and be able to rely on the ferry because your commute is a little bit nicer when you're on the water instead of underground in the subway terminal like everybody else. It's just nice to have both options. Another thing that is great about waterfront neighborhoods is waterfront neighborhoods have amazing recreation options in New York City. What do I mean by recreation? You have a great spot to run. You have a great spot to just take a walk, like an afternoon stroll. If you want to just be able to get out of the urban chaos of the city, you're able to have a spot to bike ride and really just even work out or do any type of athletic activities by the waterfront. You have a view, you have space, and neighborhoods that are landlocked in New York City don't have that. And Williamsburg is one of those neighborhoods in Brooklyn that does have a ton of that. You're going to have two main parks in Williamsburg on the waterfront. One of them is going to be Domino Park. Domino Park is probably the most famous out of the two. It is known for being where the Domino factory once was, and it's actually very prominent that you'll be able to see the Domino sign that they have on the building there nowadays, which is converted apartments. Domino Park is probably one of the areas in Williamsburg that people are the most familiar with. The other park is Bushwick Inlet Park. So that is another waterfront park. It's actually bigger than Domino Park, but it doesn't get as much love on Instagram and online as Domino Park does. Domino Park is a little bit more built up. They have a really nice playground there and like activities for kids. And Bushwick Inlet Park is more just like a space where you would just walk around. But they do have a little bit of entertainment there as well. And it's very spacious. Something that you'll see a lot of New Yorkers taking advantage of in the nicer months, meaning nicer weather, is having a picnic in Williamsburg. This is so popular there. And the reason why is, of course, because you have so much green space, but also the views are incredible. So it really is a great top-notch neighborhood for a picnic. Now, you might think that's a little bit weird to have a picnic in New York City, but it is so common to have picnics here in the nicer weather months. It is probably one of my favorite things to do in New York City, and also one of the cheapest. And if you know anything about New York City, everybody knows that nothing really is cheap here. So being able to kind of have an affordable picnic with just like grabbing food or bringing food from home is just such a great summer activity. City. I can't recommend it enough. And I also recommend doing this in Williamsburg, that's for sure. City bikes are so popular in New York City, and I have to say that Williamsburg is probably one of my favorite neighborhoods to city bike in. Now, it can get a little bit congested sometimes with all the people kind of walking through the streets, especially on a weekend, because a lot of people do brunch and like to go to different cafes and places in this neighborhood. But it is fun to city bike through Williamsburg, and it's fun to city bike in a neighborhood that has a waterfront because you are getting a view depending on where you city bike. So you do have that option in Williamsburg. You may have heard of this event in New York City. It's called Smorgasburg. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've been there many times, so you would think that I'm pronouncing that correctly after all these years. But they have one of these events in Williamsburg. What is this event? This is a weekly food festival in New York City. It's very, very popular. It's been around for years and years and years, where they have literally all different types of food that they offer there in food trucks. They have every type of ethnic food that you can imagine. They have Italian food, they have Indian food, they have Mexican food, they have everything. I know I'm leaving a lot out, but they have so many different options. They really do offer so much, and I highly recommend that you check out this food festival. We'll put up some pictures so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't the only location that they offer it. However, Williamsburg is probably one of my favorite locations, but they do have them in other places in and around the city nowadays. So this is just a little taste of what you can expect living on the waterfront in Williamsburg. Now, Williamsburg is a gigantic Brooklyn neighborhood. You don't have to live on the waterfront here. However, Williamsburg is also a very walkable neighborhood, so even if you don't live on the waterfront, you can easily walk to the waterfront if you're willing to walk a few blocks. I recommend living on the waterfront here so much. It's one of my favorite things about Williamsburg is the waterfront here, and the views here are absolutely incredible, so I definitely recommend it. But at the same time, I always say in my videos that I always recommend that when people are looking for a new neighborhood to move to, that they really spend time in that neighborhood and kind of see for themselves what the neighborhood is like and what the block that they even would be living on would be like. I definitely always recommend that people do this, and I recommend that if you're considering this area, do this as well and see if you like this area of Williamsburg. I would love to know, would you live on the waterfront in Williamsburg, or do you live on the waterfront in Williamsburg? As always, I just love hearing from you guys.